Well, the US no longer signed up to that Paris climate agreement, Trump ordering its withdrawal and saying he would end aid to the countries worst hit by climate change. A denier of global warming, Trump has promised to drill, baby, drill. So what will his next 4 years in the White House mean for the world's environmental future? Well, let's speak now to a strategist for European climate action, Mr. Neil Makaroff. Mr. Makaroff, thanks for your time. The United States then once again withdrawing from that Paris climate agreement. I mean, it's happened before. Is it that big a deal?
Well, history tells us that the climate regime is relatively resilient and solid, especially when the US disengage. Indeed, in 2001, when Bush decided to withdraw the US from the Kyoto Protocol, countries continue. And the same happened in 2016 when Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement the first time. So the net zero transition is actually happening in many countries in the world. And this is set to continue because it's not only about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For many countries in the world, it's about reducing dependency on oil and gas imports and making the economy more energy secure. So despite what the White House is doing now, many countries are going to continue the net zero transition globally.
But the US is the world's largest polluter, is it not? And, you know, if they're going to drill, baby, drill, you know, what do you see happening potentially in the next 4 years? I mean, there's talk of going for oil in the Arctic, but I believe that would be a very expensive place. So what do you think might actually play out beyond these words?
No, definitely. I mean, the Trump administration is doing what they promised during the first day in office, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, but also unlocking a license for oil and gas projects and new infrastructures. And this could emit more than 4 billion tons of CO2, additional CO2 in the atmosphere, which is the equivalent of Japan and the EU's emission combined. So it's a huge amount of climate impact that might be exacerbated by the Trump administration's policies. At the same time, when we have wildfires in South California still out of control and major hurricanes affecting the US, especially in North Carolina. So we see that there is clearly a discrepancy between the climate consequences on one hand and the Trump policies on the other end. But clearly, other countries are engaged in that transition, and probably they won't roll back and follow the US leadership in that regard, because it's not only a matter of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. It's now a matter of technological leadership. It's a matter of innovation and also energy security for many parts of the world, especially in China and the EU. So those countries might take advantage of the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement to even take more leadership at the global stage.
We have seen advances made in China over the past number of years, and notably when it comes to renewable energy. I mean, it ultimately comes down to what's going to be economically more beneficial to governments. The US is going to focus, it looks like, on oil and that industry. But take us through, within 4 years, could we see economically things start to change?
Yeah, to be honest, the obsession of Donald Trump for fossil fuels is rather short-sighted, as he's turning back America from the new industrial era which is emerging. The Biden administration tried to catch up with those net zero technologies, which is clearly the leading technologies in terms of growth and in terms of jobs. 400,000 jobs have been created, American green jobs, especially in red states, in Republican states, regarding solar manufacturing or wind turbine manufacturing, or also electric vehicles manufacturing and deployment. And those jobs are clearly at risk with the reverse of the Biden administration policies. So that might cost a lot to the American economy at the end. And also all the new oil and gas production that will be out of the Trump policies might not find client in the meantime, as other countries in the world are also decreasing gas and oil demand. This is the case for China, but this is also the case for the European Union, as Europeans are now effectively reducing their demand for gas.
But if the world's largest polluter, the United States, gets even more polluting, I mean, we share the world climate, so ultimately we're all impacted. I mean, how much damage could the next 4 years do to all of us. We're already gone beyond what we've been told was the point of no return.
No, absolutely. The American emissions are clearly, the US is the second most biggest emitter in the world after China. And clearly with the Trump administration, this might become even worse with 4 billion tons of CO2 of additional emission that could be released in the atmosphere, the equivalent of Japan and the EU emissions annually. So it's a massive impact for climate change, and it might exacerbate the climate crisis in all the world, but also domestically at the US level. So at the end, Americans might be the first impacted because more than 80% of the US territory have been impacted by climate disasters or events in the last 4 years, and this might get worse in the coming years. So yes, of course, as Europeans, but also other parts of the world, we will be impacted by those Trump administration decisions, but clearly American people will be the first to be impacted probably.
But you do sound hopeful that the rest of the world won't follow that more short-sighted view of energy and that we're turning towards a greener solution. But how much are we living up to the agreements made here in Europe, for example? How much are we living up to the agreements made under that Paris Accord?
No, I mean, today Europeans have two options. Either they decide to follow Trump and to do some concessions, importing more liquefied natural gas from the US, but then it means that they are also subject to very volatile energy prices on international markets. They will be more exposed also to the domestic politics of the United States, or they decide to continue the net zero transition, which is a second option. And then by deploying renewables, electrifying the economy, they might get more energy secure and basically less exposed to the US internal politics. So that's probably a smarter choice for many decision makers to continue the net zero transition. Whatever the political color you have, it's not in your interest to be strongly linked energy in your energy with the US gas and oil sectors at the moment, given the internal American politics.
Indeed, and it's often the space flights and the wars that are so damaging to our environment. But when we speak about climate change, it's often a doom and gloom scenario. Before we leave you, humanity still has time to turn this around, does it not? Do you think we are starting, apart from maybe one or two world leaders, overall, do you think people are starting to really acknowledge the problem and turn rapidly enough in the right direction?
Yeah, it seems with the impact, most of the people are now very aware of the climate crisis. Many people also, their jobs depends on new industries, net zero industries, especially in the US. I mean, 80% of the green jobs are actually located in Republican states, and they are the first that are going to suffer from the Trump administration policies. So clearly, I think very soon, the Americans will wake up and realize that maybe turning back the clock on the net zero transition leadership might be a very bad choice for the United States.
Okay, well, Neil Makaroff, all we can do for now is wait and see. But for now, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much.